Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
You ever feel like you're invisible to the people who should see you most? Like no matter how hard you try, they just can't or won't notice you? That's me. My name's Jake Carter. I'm 32 years old, and until 5 years ago, I thought my life was on track. Sure, it wasn't glamorous. I worked at a diner called Mama Lou's, flipping pancakes and pouring coffee. But hey, it paid the bills. Or so I told myself. But then one day, everything changed. And it all started with a goddamn bank statement. It was a Friday afternoon. Dad had invited me over for dinner, which usually meant grilled chicken breasts and some lecture about responsibility. You know, typical dad stuff. But this time felt different. He seemed nervous, fidgety even. When he asked me to grab the mail from the porch, I didn't think much of it. Until I saw the envelope, a letter from the bank. Curiosity got the better of me. As soon as I closed the front door behind me, I opened it. At first, it looked normal. Account balances, transaction history, but then I saw it. A transfer. $500,000. To Claire, my sister, for law school tuition. Let me pause here for a second, because you might be wondering who Claire is. She's my older sister by 2 years, and growing up, she was always the golden child. Perfect grades, captain of the debate team, homecoming queen, you name it, she did it. Everyone loved her. Teachers, coaches, neighbors. They all raved about how bright her future would be. Meanwhile, I was just, well, me. Average grades, decent sports skills, but nothing extraordinary. Not that anyone noticed. Anyway, back to the bank statement. $500,000. That kind of money could change someone's life. It certainly would have changed mine. Instead, it went straight into her Ivy League dream fund. My hands shook as I read it again. $500,000. I couldn't believe it. How could he do this without even consulting me? Didn't I deserve a chance to? Wasn't family supposed to support each other equally? Before I could process what I'd found, Dad walked in. "What are you doing?" he barked, snatching the paper out of my hand. "I'm looking at reality," I shot back. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Jake, your sister has always been the one with potential. She deserves every opportunity. And what about me?" I snapped. "Do I not get any chances? Am I supposed to be happy working at Mama Lou's forever?" His face hardened. "Face facts, son. You're only good enough for a diner job." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because they were new. I'd heard variations of them my whole life, but because hearing him say it outright made it real. In that moment, I realized something. He didn't believe in me. Not really. Later that night, lying awake in bed, I couldn't shake the anger coursing through me. How could he do this? How could he give away $500,000 without even considering if I might need it someday? Wasn't family supposed to support each other equally? I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation in my head. Over and over, his dismissive tone echoed in my ears. "You're only good enough for a diner job." Now, let me set the stage for why those words stung so deeply. Growing up, Dad was always comparing us, me and Claire. If she aced a test, he'd ask me why I hadn't done the same. If she won an award, he'd pat her on the back while giving me a side eye. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. We grew up together, shared secrets, laughed till we cried. But there was always this unspoken tension between us. She was the star, and I was, well, the backup singer. And don't even get me started on Mom. She passed away when I was 12, leaving Dad to raise both of us. From that point on, things shifted. Claire became his pride and joy, while I faded into the background. Maybe it was easier for him to focus on her success than deal with his own grief. I'll never know. All I know is that I spent years trying to prove myself, only to be met with indifference or worse, condescension. So yeah, hearing him say I wasn't worth investing in wasn't exactly surprising. But it still hurt. Deep down, I guess I'd held on to this tiny sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd come around someday. That he'd see me for who I truly was instead of dismissing me as just another cog in the machine. But now, staring at the ceiling in my tiny apartment, I knew that hope was gone. If they weren't going to invest in me, I'd have to invest in myself. But where to start? The next morning, I woke up feeling raw but determined. Work was my usual grind, long hours, tired customers, and endless dishes to clean. But today, it felt different. Every tip jar filled, every late-night shift endured. It was all fuel for the fire burning within me. As I flipped pancakes and served coffee, my mind raced with possibilities. Could I go back to school? Start a business? Do something, anything, to prove them wrong? The problem was, I didn't have the resources. No savings, no connections, and definitely no trust fund waiting in the wings. Everything I owned came from hard-earned paychecks, and that wasn't changing anytime soon. Still, I clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, I could carve out a path for myself. One small step at a time. First, though, there was one more confrontation I needed to have. With Claire. She deserved to hear exactly what I thought of her little golden girl act. Little did I know, she'd have plenty to say right back. Have you ever felt completely undervalued by someone close to you? Comment below if this hits home. 2 weeks passed since I discovered Dad's secret. 2 weeks of simmering anger, restless nights, and endless questions swirling in my mind. How could they do this to me? Did they really think I wouldn't find out? And what did it say about how they saw me? That I wasn't even worth considering. But as much as I wanted to stew in my resentment, I knew I couldn't let it consume me. So, I decided to confront Claire. If anyone deserved to hear my side of things, it was her. After all, she'd been the one reaping the benefits of Dad's favoritism for years. I caught up with her at her fancy law firm downtown. She worked late most nights, so I figured this would be the perfect time to catch her alone. Walking into that sleek office building felt like stepping into another world, one I'd never belonged to. Polished marble floors, designer furniture, and people dressed in $1,000 suits. It was everything Mama Lou's wasn't. When I finally found her desk, she looked up from her computer with an expression somewhere between surprise and annoyance. "Jake, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Make it quick. I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. Her casual dismissal only fueled my frustration. Taking a deep breath, I dove right in. "You know about the money, don't you? The $500,000 Dad gave you for law school." Her perfectly manicured eyebrows arched slightly. "Of course I know about it. Why wouldn't I? Because maybe, just maybe, you should have asked if I needed it too." I snapped, louder than I intended. Claire leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Oh, please. Like you'd ever use it for anything productive. You're happy flipping burgers and serving coffee. That's your life, Jake. Accept it." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. For a moment, I sat there speechless, staring at her like she'd grown 2 heads. Was she serious? Did she really think so little of me? "You have no idea what I'm capable of," I finally managed to choke out. "Just because you've had every advantage handed to you doesn't mean I can't achieve something too." She smirked, a cold, calculating smirk that sent a chill down my spine. "Be practical, Jake. Face facts. Some people are born winners and some aren't. Guess which category you fall into?" That smirk, that smug, superior attitude. It was like she wasn't just dismissing me, she was erasing me entirely. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. She didn't care about me. Not really. To her, I was just the sibling who didn't measure up, the guy who made her look good by comparison. As I stormed out of her office, my hands balled into fists, I replayed our conversation over and over in my head. Her condescension stung worse than Dad's rejection because, deep down, I'd always hoped she believed in me, even if no one else did. But instead of letting her win, I resolved to prove her wrong. If she thought I was destined for mediocrity, I'd show her exactly what someone like me could accomplish. Maybe I didn't come from privilege or wealth, but I had something far more valuable: determination. Back at Mama Lou's, I threw myself into work with renewed vigor. Every dish I washed, every table I cleared became part of my mission. I started saving every penny I earned, cutting back on unnecessary expenses and putting aside whatever I could spare. At night, after everyone else had gone home, I taught myself new skills online: coding, graphic design, basic entrepreneurship, anything that might help me build a better future. It wasn't easy. There were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, when doubt crept in and whispered that maybe Claire was right. But then I'd remember her smirk, her cruel words, and it would push me forward. I wasn't doing this for her approval. I was doing it for me, for the chance to prove that I mattered, that I was worth more than anyone had ever given me credit for. One evening, while taking a break in the staff lounge, I struck up a conversation with Sarah, one of my coworkers. She'd been at Mama Lou's longer than anyone else, and she had a way of making even the toughest days feel bearable. We talked about everything under the sun: music, movies, dreams, but eventually, the conversation turned to my goals. "So, you really think you can start your own business?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I won't stop trying until I figure it out." She smiled warmly. "That's the spirit, Jake. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight against ourselves." Her words stuck with me long after our shift ended. Maybe she was right. Maybe the real enemy wasn't Claire or Dad. It was the voice inside my head telling me I wasn't good enough. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see progress. Small victories, sure, but they added up. A freelance coding gig here, a graphic design project there. Each success chipped away at the doubts that had once held me back. Still, the memory of Claire's smirk lingered, haunting me whenever I doubted myself. Would proving her wrong be enough? Or would it leave me wanting more? 5 months after my confrontation with Claire, I stood in front of the mirror in my tiny apartment, staring at the man reflected back at me. Same scruffy beard, same tired eyes, but something had changed. Beneath the surface, there was a fire burning inside me, one fueled by years of suppressed anger and newfound determination. I wasn't just working anymore. I was fighting. Every late-night coding session, every freelance gig, every dollar saved, it all added up to something bigger than Mama Lou's or Dad's dismissive words. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something real, something that belonged to me and only me. The turning point came when Sarah introduced me to Mark, a regular customer who owned a small tech startup. He'd been coming into Mama Lou's for years, always ordering the same thing, a black coffee and a plain omelet, and we'd struck up a friendship over our shared love of obscure indie bands. One day, during a lull in the lunch rush, he noticed me hunched over my laptop between orders. "What are you working on?" he asked, nodding toward the screen. "A website," I replied, trying not to sound too eager. "For a client." He raised an eyebrow. "You do web design?" "Yeah, sort of. I've been teaching myself." Mark leaned forward, intrigued. "Ever think about joining a team? My company's growing, and we could use someone with your hustle." To say I was shocked would be an understatement. A real job offer, something beyond flipping pancakes? It felt surreal. But as much as I wanted to jump at the chance, I hesitated. Could I trust this opportunity? Was I ready? Sarah saw the doubt in my eyes later that night. "Don't let fear hold you back, Jake," she said firmly. "If you don't take risks, you'll never know what you're capable of." Her words stuck with me. The next morning, I called Mark and accepted the position. It wasn't glamorous, junior developer, minimum wage, but it was a start. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving forward instead of treading water. Balancing work at Mama Lou's with my new role at Mark's startup wasn't easy. There were days when I barely slept, juggling early shifts at the diner with late nights debugging code. But through it all, I kept reminding myself why I was doing it. To prove them wrong. To prove her wrong. Claire didn't know about my side hustle. Not yet. Part of me wanted to keep it that way, to surprise her with my success when the time was right. Another part of me wondered if she'd even care. After all, she'd already written me off as a loser destined for mediocrity. Why would anything I did change her mind? But then again, maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe this wasn't about her at all. Maybe it was about me proving to myself that I could succeed without anyone's help or approval. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Claire unexpectedly. She was waiting outside the building, talking animatedly into her phone. When she spotted me, her expression shifted from professional confidence to mild irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, glancing at her watch. "I work here now," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. No need to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much her presence still rattled me. Her eyebrows shot up. "Work? Here? Since when?" "Since a few months ago," I said, shrugging. Figured it was time to try something new. She studied me for a moment, her lips curling into that familiar smirk. "Well, good luck with that. Let me know how long it lasts." And just like that, she walked away, leaving me standing there seething. Her words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. If she thought I'd fail, I'd make sure she was wrong. As the months went on, things started falling into place. I earned a promotion at the startup, took on more challenging projects, and slowly built a reputation within the company. Meanwhile, I continued saving every penny I could spare, funneling it into a savings account earmarked for whatever came next. But success didn't come without its challenges. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, whispering that maybe Claire was right, that maybe I wasn't cut out for this world. Those were the times I reminded myself of everything I'd overcome so far. Of the long hours, the sacrifices, the sheer stubbornness that had brought me this far. By the end of the year, I'd achieved something remarkable. I closed my first major deal as a lead developer on a project that netted the company 6 figures. As the team celebrated, I sat quietly in the corner, reflecting on how far I'd come. From flipping pancakes to closing deals, it seemed impossible, almost like a dream. Yet here I was, living proof that hard work and perseverance could pay off. But as proud as I was of myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Claire's smirk still haunted me, lingering in the back of my mind like a ghost refusing to leave. Would proving her wrong ever truly satisfy me? Or was there something deeper driving me forward? 5 years. That's how long it took for my life to transform from a diner job to running my own tech startup. 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears, of late nights coding, early mornings brainstorming, and countless sacrifices. And now, standing in my corner office overlooking the city skyline, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. The company I'd built, Carter Tech, wasn't just thriving, it was revolutionizing the industry. We specialized in creating accessible software solutions for small businesses, helping entrepreneurs like me who once struggled to compete. Our flagship product, an AI-driven platform called BizBoost, had already earned millions in revenue and garnered attention from some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley. But here's the thing. None of this would have been possible without the fire lit inside me all those years ago. The anger, the hurt, the determination to prove everyone wrong. Especially Claire. It was at one of our annual shareholder meetings that fate decided to throw her back into my life. She walked into the room like she owned the place, dressed in her usual power suit, carrying herself with that air of superiority she perfected since childhood. Only this time, something was off. Her usual confidence seemed strained. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes that I'd never seen before. When she spotted me, her jaw tightened. "Jake," she said coolly, though her voice wavered slightly. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you, I imagine," I replied, matching her tone. "Working." Her lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, please. You? In charge of something important? Don't make me laugh." I smiled politely, masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Funny you should say that. Last quarter, my company brought in over $20 million in revenue. How's your firm doing these days?" Her face paled. For the first time ever, I saw genuine fear in her expression. It didn't last long. She quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. "Impressive, I guess. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is probably just a fluke." If only she knew the truth. Later that evening, I caught snippets of news reports while scrolling through my phone. Turns out Claire's prestigious law firm had been embroiled in a massive scandal involving unethical practices. Clients were filing lawsuits, partners were jumping ship, and her name was splashed across headlines as one of the key players involved. At first, I felt nothing but schadenfreude. Karma was finally catching up to her, and part of me reveled in it. But as the days passed, the satisfaction faded, replaced by something heavier, sympathy. Despite everything, she was still my sister. And watching her world crumble around her wasn't exactly the victory I'd imagined. A few weeks later, Dad called me unexpectedly. He sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. "Jake," he began hesitantly. "Can we talk?" "Sure, Dad. What's going on?" "It's about Claire. She's struggling. The firm closed down, and now she's lost everything. Your mom always said family sticks together, no matter what. Can you help her?" "Help her?" After everything she'd done, every insult she'd thrown my way, my initial reaction was to refuse outright. Let her suffer for once. Let her taste what it feels like to be dismissed, overlooked, undervalued. But then I thought about Dad, about the weight of guilt he carried for favoring Claire over me all those years ago. If I turned her away now, would it break him completely? "I'll think about it," I said finally, ending the call before I could change my mind. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the stack of legal documents Dad had sent over detailing Claire's financial ruin. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, assets frozen, credit ruined. She was starting from scratch, just like I had 5 years earlier. Only this time, there was no secret bank transfer waiting in the wings. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider her perspective. Maybe she hadn't asked for Dad's favoritism. Maybe she felt the same pressure I did, albeit from a different angle. Was it possible she'd resented him too, even if she hid it better than I ever could? The next morning, I made a decision. Not because I forgave her. Not yet, but because I understood something fundamental. Holding on to anger wouldn't heal anything. It would only poison me further. So, I reached out to Claire. A simple message. "Let's meet." When we sat down in a quiet cafe downtown, neither of us knew quite what to say. The tension between us was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, she broke the silence. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly, avoiding eye contact. "I know that." "No, you're right," I replied. "I don't. But maybe we both owe each other a chance to start over." Her head snapped up, surprise written all over her face. Start over? After everything? I'm not saying it'll be easy, I admitted, but I'm willing to try. Are you? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I am. As we left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. One filled with uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. Forgiveness wasn't going to happen overnight, and trust would take time to rebuild. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful, not just for myself, but for us. The weeks following my meeting with Claire were a mix of awkwardness, tension, and tentative steps toward understanding. We didn't suddenly become best friends, far from it. But we did begin having conversations that weren't laced with bitterness or condescension. Slowly, the walls between us started to crumble, revealing truths neither of us had been willing to confront before. One evening, as we sat together in Dad's living room for what felt like the first real family dinner in years, the air was thick with unspoken words. Dad shuffled nervously, clearing his throat several times before finally speaking. Jake, he began, his voice trembling slightly. I need to say something. Something I should have said a long time ago. My stomach tightened. I braced myself for another apology, another attempt to justify his actions. But instead, he surprised me. I made mistakes, he admitted, looking directly at me for the first time in ages. Big ones. I thought I was doing the right thing by investing in Claire's future, but I realize now how wrong I was. You deserved more than I gave you. More than just scraps and empty promises. His words hung heavy in the silence that followed. For once, there was no defensiveness, no excuses, just raw honesty. It threw me off guard, leaving me unsure of how to respond. It's okay, Dad, I stammered, though it wasn't entirely true. The pain of those years wouldn't disappear overnight, no matter how sincere his apology seemed. No, it's not, he interrupted, shaking his head firmly. It's not okay, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if that's what it takes. Claire watched the exchange silently, her expression unreadable. When Dad turned to her, she flinched slightly, as though bracing herself for criticism. And you, he continued, his voice softer this time, you never asked for any of this. I pushed you hard because I wanted you to succeed, but maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I forgot to ask whether you even wanted all of it. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability in her gaze. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, seemingly unable to find the words. After dinner, Claire and I retreated to the backyard, sitting side by side on the old wooden swing set we'd played on as kids. The cool night air wrapped around us like an invisible blanket, carrying with it the weight of years gone by. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything, for thinking I was better than you, for letting Dad treat you like you weren't worth anything. I glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. You really mean that? She nodded, wiping away a stray tear. Yeah, I always knew you were capable of great things. You proved that when you started your company. But back then, I guess I was scared. Scared that if I admitted you were just as good as me, it would mean I wasn't special anymore. Her admission hit me harder than I expected. All these years, I'd assumed her confidence stemmed from genuine belief in her superiority. Now, hearing her admit to insecurity, I realized how much we'd both been struggling in our own ways. I get it, I said slowly. We all have our demons. Mine just happened to be fueled by yours. She laughed softly, though it carried a hint of sadness. Guess we're more alike than either of us wanted to admit. Over the next few weeks, our relationship continued to evolve. Conversations became less guarded. Laughter returned to family gatherings. And for the first time in years, I felt like we might actually stand a chance at rebuilding what we'd lost. But one day, while helping Claire organize some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon something that changed everything. A letter addressed to Dad, dated years earlier. Written in Claire's handwriting. It detailed her struggles during law school. The pressure, the self-doubt, the overwhelming fear that she wouldn't live up to expectations. Most shocking of all, she confessed that she hadn't wanted the money initially, that she'd begged Dad not to give it to her, fearing it would create resentment between us. Holding the letter in my hands, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger, yes, but also empathy. How could I stay mad at someone who'd tried, in their own way, to protect me, who'd carried the burden of guilt alongside me, even when I hadn't known it? That night, I confronted Claire about the letter. She looked genuinely shocked when I showed it to her, explaining that she'd forgotten about it until now. I wrote that after my first semester, she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. I thought if Dad saw how stressed I was, he'd reconsider. But he didn't listen. He kept pushing me, telling me I had to be perfect. And eventually, I stopped fighting him. Her confession left me speechless. Here I'd spent years blaming her for accepting the money, when in reality, she'd resisted it every step of the way. Suddenly, the lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, forcing me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on the lessons learned, not just about Claire or Dad, but about myself. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing peace over bitterness. Redemption wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving yourself worthy. And maybe, just maybe, love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present, flaws and all. 5 years ago, I was a guy flipping pancakes at Mama Lou's, dreaming of something more, but convinced it would never happen. Today, I'm the founder of a thriving tech startup, sitting in an office overlooking the city skyline. The distance between those two versions of myself feels immeasurable, like crossing an entire ocean instead of just a few blocks. But here's the thing. Success didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the scars left by Dad's favoritism or Claire's condescension. It didn't heal the wounds of growing up feeling invisible, overlooked, and undervalued. What it did do, though, was give me perspective. Perspective on who I am, where I came from, and what truly matters. Months after our attic discovery, things with Claire and Dad settled into a fragile equilibrium. We weren't perfect. We still had our disagreements, our moments of frustration, but we were working through them. For the first time in my life, I felt like part of a team rather than an outsider looking in. Claire, now rebuilding her career after the scandal, took a job as a paralegal at a small firm. She admitted it wasn't glamorous, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her voice when she talked about learning new skills and rediscovering her passion for justice. As for Dad, he retired early, spending most of his time volunteering at local shelters and mentoring kids from underprivileged backgrounds. Watching him find purpose outside the shadow of his mistakes gave me hope that redemption is possible for all of us. One evening, Sarah stopped by my office unannounced. She'd been a constant presence throughout my journey, offering advice, encouragement, and sometimes tough love when I needed it most. Over coffee, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever wonder if this is enough?" she said, gesturing toward the view outside my window. "All the money, the success, the recognition, is it really what you set out to achieve?" Her words lingered in the air, forcing me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding. Had I chased success to prove them wrong, or to prove myself right? Was the validation I sought from others ultimately hollow, or had it led me to something deeper? I don't know, I admitted finally. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. All I know is that I'm happier now than I've ever been. Not because of the money or the title, but because I built something meaningful, something that matters. She smiled knowingly. And maybe that's all that counts. As the months turned into years, I found myself reflecting on the choices I'd made, the risks I'd taken, the bridges I'd rebuilt, the lessons I'd learned. Forgiveness hadn't come easily. It required patience, vulnerability, and a willingness to let go of grudges that once defined me. But letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing peace over bitterness, progress over stagnation. Dad and I started having regular phone calls, conversations that ranged from sports updates to philosophical debates. Claire and I bonded over shared memories of childhood antics, laughing until tears streamed down our faces. Slowly but surely, the cracks in our relationship began to mend, though they'd never be completely seamless. Looking back, I realize now that the real victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was proving myself right. Right about my potential, my resilience, my ability to overcome obstacles no one thought I could. Success, in its purest form, isn't about external validation. It's about internal fulfillment. It's about waking up every day, knowing you're living authentically, pursuing your passions, and contributing to the world in your own unique way. And yet questions remain. Did I make the right choice in forgiving Claire and Dad? Would I have been better off holding onto my anger, using it as fuel for further ambition? Is reconciliation always worth the effort, or are some wounds too deep to heal? I don't have answers to these questions, not definitive ones. Anyway, what I do have is clarity. Clarity about who I am, where I stand, and what I want moving forward. Life isn't about finding absolute truths. It's about navigating uncertainties with grace, courage, and authenticity. Today, as I sit in my office, surrounded by reminders of how far I've come, I can't help but smile. The road ahead won't be easy. No path ever is. But I'm ready for whatever comes next. Because one thing I've learned is this: you define your worth, not anyone else. And if you believe in yourself, even when no one else does, amazing things can happen. To all of you watching, if my story resonates with you, take heart. Your journey may not look like mine, but it's yours to create. Believe in yourself, fight for what you deserve, and never let anyone tell you who you are or aren't capable of becoming. A year after our reconciliation, life seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm, or so I thought. But beneath the surface, old wounds still lingered, waiting for the right moment to resurface. It happened one rainy afternoon when Claire showed up at my office unannounced. She looked different, softer, somehow less polished than usual. Her hair was damp from the rain, and there was a vulnerability in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Jake," she began hesitantly, "I need your help." My stomach tightened. "Help? From me? After everything?" "I'm starting a nonprofit," she continued quickly, as if sensing my hesitation. "It'll provide legal aid to low-income families. I want you to be part of it, to bring your tech expertise to the table." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The idea itself was noble, something I could get behind. But coming from her, it felt complicated. Was this genuine, or another attempt to reclaim some semblance of her former glory? "I'll think about it," I said, finally buying myself time. That night, I couldn't shake the memory of her plea. Part of me wanted to say yes, to support her in this new endeavor and solidify our fragile bond. Another part of me bristled at the thought of collaborating with her again, fearing it might reopen old wounds. Dad called later that evening, his voice tinged with concern. "Jake," he said gently, "you know your sister's trying hard, right? She's not the same person she used to be." "And neither am I," I replied sharply, though instantly regretting my tone. "Sorry, Dad. It's just hard to trust her after everything." He sighed heavily. "Trust takes time, son. But holding on to anger won't change the past. It'll only hold you back." His words echoed in my mind long after we hung up. Was he right? Could I truly move past the resentment that had fueled me for so long? Over the next few days, I wrestled with the decision. In the end, I agreed to meet Claire halfway, not fully committing but offering guidance where needed. As we worked together, something unexpected happened. I saw glimpses of the sister I'd once admired, the one who fought for justice, stood up for the underdog, and dreamed big despite the odds. But alongside those moments came flashes of the old Claire, the one who dismissed me, who smirked at my failures. It was a double-edged sword, forcing me to confront the duality within her, and perhaps within myself. By the time the nonprofit launched 6 months later, I found myself genuinely proud of what we'd accomplished. Watching Claire speak passionately about their mission reminded me why I'd started Carter Tech in the first place: to create opportunities for people like us who'd been told they weren't good enough. Yet even as I celebrated her success, a nagging question remained. Had she truly changed, or was this just another act? 2 years later, I stood outside the grand opening of Claire's nonprofit, watching her receive accolades from dignitaries and donors alike. She looked radiant, confident, and unrecognizable from the broken woman who'd walked into my office that rainy day. Yet amidst the applause and praise, I noticed something curious, a flicker of sadness in her eyes, a shadow lurking beneath the surface. It wasn't until later, during a quiet moment in her office, that she finally opened up. "Jake," she said softly, meeting my gaze for the first time in ages, "there's something I've never told anyone." My heart raced. What could she possibly have left unsaid after all these years? "It's about Mom," she continued, her voice trembling. "Before she passed, she made me promise something. She said I had to take care of you, to make sure you never felt invisible, never doubted your worth." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. All these years, I'd assumed her favoritism stemmed from Dad's preferences alone. But now, hearing her admit that it was also tied to Mom's final wish, it changed everything. "I tried," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I really did, but I messed up. Every single time, I let pride and fear get in the way. And for that, I'm so sorry." For a long moment, I didn't know how to respond. The weight of her words pressed down on me, forcing me to confront truths I'd buried deep within myself. Did I forgive her? Could I ever fully trust her again? "I believe you," I said finally, surprising even myself. "And maybe I owe you an apology too, for letting anger define me for so long." Her lips curved into a small smile. one filled with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Jake. That means more than you know. As the weeks turned into months, our relationship continued to evolve. Conversations became easier, laughter returned to family gatherings, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were truly equals, partners rather than rivals. But one question lingered in the back of my mind. Had we truly resolved everything, or were there still pieces of the puzzle missing? Perhaps some questions are meant to remain unanswered, their ambiguity serving as a reminder of life's complexities. Today, as I sit in my office overlooking the city skyline, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. Success isn't a destination. It's a process, a constant evolution of self-discovery and growth. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over bitterness. And love, well, love isn't perfect. It's messy, flawed, and sometimes painful, but it's also beautiful, resilient, and worth fighting for. To all of you watching, if my story resonates with you, remember this. Your worth isn't defined by others' opinions. It's defined by the choices you make, the battles you fight, and the person you become along the way. 5 years after launching my startup, 10 years since discovering Dad's secret, and countless conversations later, I find myself sitting in the same diner where it all began, Mama Lou's. It's been renovated since I left, modernized with sleek countertops and trendy decor, but the heart of the place remains unchanged. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee still lingers in the air, a comforting reminder of where I came from. I'm here to meet Sarah, who suggested we catch up over breakfast. She's been a constant presence throughout my journey, offering wisdom and perspective when I needed it most. Over pancakes and orange juice, she asked me a question that stops me in my tracks. Jake, she says thoughtfully, do you ever think about what might have happened if things had gone differently? If Dad hadn't given Claire the money, or if you'd stayed at Mama Lou's forever? The question hangs in the air, heavy with possibility. For a moment, I consider the alternate realities, the paths not taken, the choices unmade. Then I shake my head slowly. No, I reply honestly, because every step led me here. Every struggle, every victory, every mistake, it all shaped who I am today. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Her smile is warm, approving. That's maturity right there, she says softly. Accepting the past without letting it define you. Later that afternoon, as I walk through the park near my office, I find myself reflecting on the people who've shaped my life. Dad, Claire, Sarah, even Mark, the man who gave me my first real break. Each of them played a role in my journey, whether they realized it or not. Some pushed me forward, others held me back. But ultimately, it was my decision to rise above their expectations, or lack thereof. Dad passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in his sleep. His death forced us all to confront the fragility of time and the importance of connection. At his funeral, Claire and I stood side by side, holding each other up as we said goodbye to the man who'd shaped our lives in ways both beautiful and painful. In those moments, I felt a strange sense of closure, not forgiveness for everything, but acceptance of the imperfections that made him human. Claire, now running her nonprofit full-time, has become someone I barely recognize, a woman driven by compassion rather than ambition, guided by principles rather than prestige. We don't always agree, and there are days when old wounds flare up unexpectedly. But we've learned to navigate those moments with patience and understanding, knowing that relationships aren't built on perfection, but on effort. As I sit on a bench overlooking the lake, I think about the future. What comes next? Is there another chapter waiting for me? Another challenge to overcome? Another dream to chase? Or is this enough? This quiet satisfaction of knowing I've lived authentically, pursued my passions, and contributed to the world in my own small way? The answer, I realize, doesn't matter. Life isn't about destinations. It's about the journey, about the people we meet, the lessons we learn, and the growth we experience along the way. Success, love, and happiness aren't static. They're fluid, evolving with us as we move through life. Just then, Claire appears beside me, carrying a cup of coffee. Mind if I join you? She asks, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Of course not, I say, scooting over to make room. We sit in silence for a while, watching the ducks paddle lazily across the water. Eventually she speaks. You know, she says quietly, I used to think success was about being better than everyone else, about proving I was worthy. But now I realize it's about being true to yourself, about finding peace in who you are, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Her words strike a chord deep within me. They echo my own thoughts, my own journey towards self-acceptance. For the first time, I see her not just as my sister, but as an equal, a fellow traveler navigating the complexities of life. I agree, I say finally. And maybe that's the best kind of success there is. She smiles, and for once it's genuine. Not smug, not condescending, but simply happy. In that moment, I feel something shift between us, a final piece of the puzzle falling into place. As the sun sets behind the trees, casting golden light over the lake, I realize something profound. Healing isn't linear. It's cyclical, repeating itself in different forms throughout our lives. We hurt, we heal, we grow, and then we do it all over again. But each cycle brings new insights, new opportunities for connection and understanding. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.